My dad suspended me from home unless I apologized to his golden child. I just said, all right. The next morning, I packed my belongings in silence and left. What came after that destroyed them completely. My old man basically kicked me out of the family right there at the dinner table, and it wasn't some big holiday or birthday or anything like that. Just a plain Friday night at my parents' place with spaghetti and garlic bread, the kind of boring, routine meal where nothing life-changing is supposed to go down, except this time it did. My sister Megan was going on one of her usual rants about work, which she does constantly, always finding some poor soul to pin all her problems on. And this week her target was a new woman named Ashley who'd just joined her team. She kept saying Ashley was useless and clueless, jabbing at her pasta and complaining that she had to redo every single thing Ashley touched. And honestly, I was barely listening because I've heard this same rant 100 times before with different names plugged in. Without thinking much, just trying to be polite and keep things light, I said maybe the new girl was still learning and that she just needed some time, not trying to start a fight, just talking. Megan froze with her fork halfway to her mouth and snapped back asking what that was supposed to mean, and I told her it meant nothing except that everyone has to start somewhere and that she'd been new once too. That's when her face flushed red and she fired back asking if I was saying she was just like Ashley. And I tried to calm it down by saying I was only pointing out that learning takes time, but she jumped straight to accusing me of undermining her and being jealous, her voice getting louder and sharper until the whole table went silent. I just sat there stunned because the conversation had gone from casual to explosive in seconds, and my mom, Linda, reached over and told her to calm down. But Megan stood up with tears already welling up, saying she was sick of it and sick of my so-called passive-aggressive comments, even though I hadn't made any comments at all. Before I could defend myself, my dad, Frank, was staring at me like I'd done something unforgivable and asked if I'd said something to upset her, and I repeated exactly what I'd said about her coworker learning, nothing more. That was enough for Megan to break into full-on crying, putting on a show and accusing me of doing it again, and Frank stood up slowly with that look on his face that meant he'd already picked a side. He told me that was enough and ordered me to apologize, and when I asked what for, he said for upsetting my sister, cutting me off when I tried to explain and demanding the apology right now. I looked at Megan through her tears and caught a quick little smirk flash across her face, just long enough for me to know she knew exactly what she was doing. And that's when I said no. Frank's face turned dark red, a vein popping out on his forehead as he asked what I'd just said, and I told him I wasn't apologizing for nothing and that she was manipulating him, which made Megan gasp dramatically and clutch at her chest like I'd slapped her. Frank slammed his hand on the table so hard the plates rattled and announced that I was suspended, and I honestly thought I'd misheard him until he clarified that I wasn't welcome in his house or at family dinners until I apologized to my sister. It felt unreal, like he'd switched to a foreign language mid-sentence, and when I asked if he was really kicking me out, he corrected me by saying he was suspending me from family events and from the house because of my disrespect. My mom tried to quietly step in and say maybe that was too extreme, but Frank snapped at her to stay out of it, and she immediately went silent like she always does. I grabbed my keys from the counter and said fine, which only made him angrier, demanding to know if that was all I had to say, and I asked him what else he wanted besides an apology. I looked at Megan again, still hiding her face but clearly satisfied, then at my dad burning with self-righteous anger, then at my mom saying nothing at all, and finally I said all right, telling him I accepted the suspension. That seemed to throw him off, but I didn't wait around to explain. I just walked out while he yelled behind me about family and respect. I drove straight home to my little one-bedroom apartment about 20 minutes away. Nothing fancy, cheap IKEA furniture, but it was mine, and I sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time with the engine off, thinking about how insane it was that a 28-year-old man with a job, a lease, and his own life had just been suspended like a teenager who missed curfew. I checked my phone and looked at my lease, 6 months left, then my job info reminding myself I was fully remote if I wanted to be, then my savings account showing 40 grand sitting there, and suddenly everything felt very clear, not angry or bitter, just obvious. If I was suspended, then I'd take the suspension seriously and all the way. I woke up the next morning at 5 because sleep wasn't happening anyway, and started packing only what mattered: clothes, my laptop, paperwork, a few photos, my grandfather's watch, my college diploma, leaving behind the couch from Craigslist, the Target TV stand, the dishes, all of it. By 7 my car was loaded, and I called my landlord to break the lease, agreeing to pay the 3-month penalty without arguing, telling him I was leaving that same day. Then I called my boss, who answered groggy on a Saturday morning, and told her I was relocating and going fully remote starting Monday, explaining it was for family reasons and that I'd be moving across the country, which she accepted after a pause as long as I kept her updated. My last stop was the bank, where I waited in the parking lot before it even opened because I wanted to close the joint account my parents had set up when I was 16, the one they said was for emergencies, but that gave them full visibility into my money. There was $8,000 sitting there, and I told the banker I was closing it because I was moving and wanted everything consolidated, watching as she transferred the funds into a brand new account at a different bank my parents had no access to and had never even heard of. I didn't leave a note or send a text. I just got back in my car and drove, and 3 days later I rolled into Portland after choosing it almost at random, far enough away to disappear, big enough to blend in, small enough not to feel overwhelming, having driven 12 hours straight on that first day. I pulled off the highway and stayed the night at some rundown motel in Nebraska, grabbed fast food for dinner, flipped through awful TV channels until I passed out, and did the exact same thing the next day as I rolled through Wyoming and then Idaho, barely thinking about anything except the road ahead. I didn't think about my family at all, didn't check my phone, didn't replay the fight. I just drove and let the miles stack up until I finally hit Portland on a Tuesday afternoon. I found a place on Craigslist that same day, month to month, already furnished, nothing special but good enough, signed the lease, moved my bags in, set up my laptop, and made sure the Wi-Fi worked before calling it a night. Wednesday morning I logged in for work like nothing had changed, and my boss sent a quick message saying she was glad I made it, and to let her know if I needed anything, which I didn't. I spent that first week wandering the city, finding coffee shops I liked, signing up at a gym, getting a library card, buying new dishes and clean sheets, slowly turning the apartment into something that felt like mine. My phone stayed silent, and I didn't reach out to my family either, which worked both ways for about 2 weeks while I settled into a routine of work, long walks, and getting comfortable in a city where nobody knew me. On day 15, my phone finally rang, and when I saw it was my mom, Linda, I just stared at it until it went to voicemail, listening later as she casually asked if I was still mad and mentioned that my dad said I was still suspended unless I apologized, but maybe I could come by for Megan's birthday dinner like everything was normal, so I deleted it. The next week my dad, Frank, called and left a voicemail that sounded more annoyed than concerned, telling me I was being stubborn and needed to apologize so we could move on, and I deleted that one too. In week 4 Megan called, and out of curiosity I answered, only to hear her complain that I was rude and demand to know why I wasn't coming to her birthday. And when I reminded her I was suspended and said no again, she accused me of being a baby and hung up, and I went right back to my coffee, my book, and my quiet new life. By week 6 my mom called 3 times in one day, and when I finally answered she kept asking where I was and why I hadn't been by in weeks, and when I reminded her I was suspended and wasn't apologizing, she said I was being difficult. So I told her I had to go and hung up. 2 weeks later, she called again, panicked this time, asking if I'd closed the joint account. And when I said yes and explained I'd moved the money, she said my dad was furious and wanted to come talk. But when she asked where I was, I told her I wasn't home and ended the call, turning off my phone and going for a long walk before turning it back on to 17 missed calls. In week 10, my dad finally got me on the phone while I was sitting in a coffee shop enjoying a peaceful morning. And he yelled so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear as I calmly told him I was living in Portland, letting the silence stretch while he processed the idea that I'd been gone for 2 months. When he ordered me to come back, I told him I was 28 and didn't take orders anymore, then hung up and finished my now cold coffee. 2 weeks later, Megan called again while I was at the gym, accusing me of causing my mom to fall apart. And when I told her I'd just taken Dad's suspension seriously and moved on with my life, she cried real tears this time, asking why I was doing this. And I told her I wasn't doing anything at all except living somewhere I was actually welcome before hanging up. By month 4, Thanksgiving rolled around, and a coworker named Sarah invited me to a low-key Friendsgiving with her roommates. So I brought a bottle of wine and walked into a small, warm apartment packed with people laughing, eating, and not measuring anyone's worth. My phone buzzed nonstop in my pocket, and when I finally checked it later that night, there were dozens of missed calls and texts from my family demanding I call back. So I turned the phone off and went back to the party. Later, Sarah found me on the balcony, asked if I was okay, handed me a beer, and without pushing said she understood family stuff. And we stood there quietly for a while until I finally said, honestly, that this was nice. I thanked Sarah for the invite. She told me I was welcome anytime, family or not. And I meant it when I said I appreciated that more than she probably realized. By month 5, my mom, Linda, showed up at my old apartment, and I only knew because she called me from there with her voice shaking, saying the landlord told her I'd been gone for months with no forwarding address, which was true. She kept asking where exactly I lived and demanded my address because she was my mother, and I reminded her that I was also an adult and that nothing had changed, not with Frank, not with Megan, not with the way things worked in that family. When she begged to visit just to see that I was okay, I told her no, because no one had apologized or acknowledged what actually happened. And when I asked if Frank had said sorry for suspending me, or if Megan had owned up to manipulating the situation, she said neither of them had done anything wrong, which told me everything I needed to know. So I ended the call and sat there staring at my phone, deciding not to block them because choosing not to answer felt stronger than disappearing completely. By month 6, Frank had a health scare and ended up in the ER with high blood pressure, and Linda called me in the middle of the night saying he was asking for me. And while I was relieved he'd be okay, I told her I wasn't coming because I was still suspended and because he hadn't apologized to me. Not really, not for choosing sides without listening. She called me heartless, and I told her I was consistent, not cruel. And after that I couldn't sleep, sitting on my balcony until sunrise and deciding that standing by my decision didn't make me a bad person. In month 8, Megan got engaged, and Linda called trying to sound excited while asking if I'd come to the wedding, and I told her I'd think about it, explaining that this wasn't about one night, but about a pattern that had gone on my whole life, where Megan's feelings mattered more and mine were always dismissed. By month 10, Christmas came, and even though Sarah invited me to her family's loud, messy holiday, I chose to spend it alone, waking up late, watching snow fall outside my Portland window, turning my phone off as it buzzed nonstop, and feeling peaceful for the first time in years. A year after I left, Frank finally called with a quiet, defeated voice and said he was sorry for suspending me. And when he asked me to come home, I told him this was home now and explained that it wasn't about one fight, but about nearly 3 decades of being second place in my own family, where Megan was defended and I was expected to absorb everything quietly. 14 months in, Megan's wedding invitation arrived, expensive and formal, with a handwritten note from Linda begging me to come, and after staring at it for days, I called her to say no, explaining that a single apology without real understanding didn't fix years of damage. When she cried and said she didn't know how to fix it, I told her the truth, that it had been broken long before I ever left, and that leaving was just the first honest thing I'd done about it. I'm just finally being honest about it. And when she asked if that meant I was never coming back, I told her I'd send a gift, a nice one. But no, I wasn't coming to the wedding. Then I hung up before she could argue. 2 weeks later, Megan called for the first time in months, telling me Mom said I wasn't coming, and I confirmed it, explaining it wasn't about Dad groveling, but about the fact that nothing had actually changed, no matter how much she claimed it had. She said Dad apologized, and everyone was trying. But when I asked what trying meant, it turned out she was talking about holiday texts and check-in calls, which I told her was the bare minimum and not real effort. When she asked what I wanted from them, I said nothing anymore, and that seemed to upset her more than anything, because she accused me of being stubborn and missing her wedding on purpose. I told her I wasn't going because she got me kicked out of the family and never apologized, because Dad took her side without listening, because Mom stayed silent, and because this was who they all were, even if they didn't like hearing it. She said she never meant for Dad to suspend me, but I reminded her that she cried on purpose, manipulated the moment, and didn't stop it once it worked, calling out the smirk I'd seen right before Dad made his decision. She denied it at first, then went quiet, and when I repeated that I saw the smirk before the tears, she didn't argue anymore, just hung up. By month 16, the wedding came and went, and I sent a gift, an expensive KitchenAid mixer, neutral and polite, the kind of thing that acknowledges an event without reopening wounds. with a simple card wishing them happiness and signed your brother. Mom called after the wedding, drunk and crying, saying it wasn't the same without me and that everyone noticed I was gone. And when she accused me of making the wedding about myself, something in me snapped just enough to calmly explain that my absence wasn't a performance, it was a boundary, and those aren't the same thing. She said it hurt Megan, and I said Megan hurt me for years and could survive one hurt in return, which made Mom gasp and call me hateful, even though all I felt was steady and calm as I watched the city lights from my balcony that night. At month 18, Dad had another health scare, worse this time, and Mom called saying he wanted to see me, but I told her if he wanted to talk, he could call me himself, because I wasn't crossing the country just because fear finally caught up to him, and he never did call. By month 20, my life kept moving forward, and I got promoted to senior project manager with a raise in my own team, my boss telling me I'd earned it and that whatever family stuff I'd left behind, the move clearly worked. That night I celebrated with Sarah and her girlfriend Maya, raising a glass to promotions, new cities, and chosen family, agreeing that family doesn't mean unlimited access, no matter how much people pretend it does. At month 22, Megan called again, unexpectedly announcing she was pregnant, and I congratulated her sincerely, even when she seemed disappointed that I didn't say more. She asked if I was ever coming back, and I told her maybe, but only if things actually changed, explaining again that understanding mattered more than apologies, and laying out the pattern she still claimed not to see, the one where she was believed and celebrated while I was doubted and expected to stay quiet. She said she didn't know I felt that way, and I told her nobody had ever asked, and that until they were willing to really examine that dynamic instead of just wanting things to feel normal again, I wasn't coming back. She didn't answer, which told me everything, and by month 24, 2 years after I left, I was sitting in my apartment on a quiet Saturday morning when my phone rang from an unknown number, and something made me answer, only to hear a woman introduce herself as Sandra, my cousin, someone I hadn't seen since some long ago Christmas, and for the first time in a while, I leaned back in my chair and listened. She said hi, and I said hi back, and then she told me she'd gotten my address from my mom and wanted to check if it was still good because she was getting married in September and wanted to send me an invitation, and I told her yeah, the Portland address still worked. She made a point of saying there was no pressure at all, that she knew I had some complicated stuff going on with my parents, but she wanted me to know I was invited as me, not as some symbol or representative of the family mess, and that honestly caught me off guard in a good way. I thanked her and told her I really appreciated that, and she said she didn't know the whole story, but from what she'd heard, good for me for having boundaries, because not enough people do. And we hung up after she repeated a couple times that there was truly no judgment either way. I sat there for a long while afterward thinking about that call, and about how strange it felt that someone in my family actually seemed to get it, which made me think maybe some things could change someday with certain people, just not with my parents and not with Megan, at least not yet, maybe not ever, and I realized I was okay with that. Now it's the present day, 2 years and 4 months since I left. I'm 30 years old and still in Portland. Just in a better place, literally and figuratively, a nicer 2-bedroom apartment where one room is my office, with real furniture, art on the walls, and plants I've somehow kept alive. I've built a real life here, one that feels solid and earned, and work has gone well too, because I got promoted again 6 months ago to Director of Operations, managing 3 project teams and 24 people, with a good salary, solid benefits, and respect from people who actually know who I am. Sarah and Maya got engaged and asked me to be a groomsman in their wedding, which I said yes to immediately, and we celebrated with overpriced sushi and way too much sake. And somewhere along the way I also started dating a guy named Tyler, an architect who's kind and funny and never pushes me to talk about my family unless I bring it up myself, which is rare. My apartment has photos on the walls now. Pictures of me with Sarah, me with Tyler, my team at an office party, my friends at trivia night. And there aren't any family photos, not out of bitterness, just because those people aren't part of my daily life anymore. My mom, Linda, still calls once a month or so, and we keep things light, talking about the weather or work or nothing important, and she doesn't push anymore, just keeps the line open like she's afraid that if she stops calling, I'll vanish completely, and maybe she's not wrong. My dad, Frank, and I don't talk at all, because he never called after that hospital stay and never reached out directly. And I don't know if that's pride or confusion, but either way the silence feels appropriate. Megan had her baby, a girl, and my mom sent me a photo, and I said she was cute, and that was true, especially with Megan's eyes. And when mom texted that I was an uncle now, I replied congratulations to her and left it at that. Last month, I flew back to the Midwest for cousin Sandra's wedding, the first time I'd been back in over 2 years, and I didn't tell my parents I was coming or reach out at all. I just showed up. And when Sandra saw me during cocktail hour, her face lit up, and she said, "You made it." And she treated me like a normal guest, introducing me around and not making me into a spectacle. I saw my parents across the room at dinner, and they saw me too, my mom going pale and my dad's jaw tightening. But neither of them came over, which was good, and Megan was there with her husband and the baby and stared at me for a moment before looking away, also good. Later that night, my mom finally came up to me and said, "You're here," and I said, "I am." And when she asked why I didn't tell them, I told her I didn't think it mattered, which she said wasn't fair, and I told her I didn't want to do this at Sandra's wedding, and after some back and forth she asked when the right time would be. I told her we already talk once a month and have pleasant conversations about nothing, and that was all I was willing to give right now. Maybe forever, maybe not, depending on whether they ever really understood why I left, not just that they missed me. She insisted she understood, and I told her she understood that I was gone and didn't like it, which isn't the same thing, and that's when my dad showed up and asked if we could talk privately later. We ended up meeting in the hotel lobby at 11 that night, sitting in a quiet corner with 3 chairs, and after a long silence my dad told me he and my mom had been seeing a therapist, couples therapy, and that most of the sessions ended up being about me and what happened. He said the therapist pointed out a pattern of prioritizing Megan, dismissing my feelings, and expecting me to be the stable one while they managed her emotions, and my mom quietly admitted it was true and that once someone named it, it became obvious. When my dad asked if that was all I had to say, I told him none of it was new information to me. And when he said they were apologizing, I asked whether they were actually apologizing or just repeating what their therapist said, which made him bristle for a second before he took a breath and said he was sorry, not just for that night, but for years of making me feel invisible, for making Megan's feelings more important than mine, and for suspending me over nothing and expecting me to take it. When I said I didn't take it, he surprised me by saying he was glad I didn't, that someone needed to draw a line and say enough, and that while he was sorry it had to be me, he was glad I respected myself enough to leave, and I just sat there looking at him, trying to figure out if there was a catch. I watched their faces closely, looking for the manipulation or some hidden angle, but I couldn't find one, so I asked them straight up if they understood why I couldn't just come back like nothing happened, and why an apology by itself wasn't enough, and Mom said yes, because apologies are just words, and they'd given me a lot of words over the years that didn't amount to much. And what I needed now was proof that things were actually different. Dad said they wanted to show me, slowly, if I'd let them, and when I asked how, they said however I wanted, phone calls, visits when I felt comfortable, no pressure and no expectations, just showing up consistently the way they should have all along. I thought about the last 2 years, about building a life without them and learning I didn't need their approval to be okay, and I told them I lived in Portland now, and that wasn't changing, and they said they knew, that they understood I had a life there with a partner, friends, and a career that didn't involve them. I told them if I let them back in, it would be small, occasional calls, and maybe a visit once or twice a year. Nothing more until I saw real change. Not promised change, but actual change, and Dad said that was fair. When I asked about Megan, they exchanged a look and Mom admitted she was still Megan, that she didn't really get it and thought I was being dramatic, and that they were working on her, but slowly. And I said then I didn't want her calling me. No guilt trips about the baby and no expectations. And if she wanted a relationship, she could start by actually apologizing. They said they'd tell her, and I told them not to, that she could figure it out on her own or not, and that was on her. We sat quietly for a minute, and then Mom asked if she could ask me something. And when she asked if I was happy in Portland, I thought about my apartment, my job, Tyler, Sarah and Maya, trivia nights, hikes, and coming home to a place that felt like mine, and I said, yeah, I am, and I could tell she meant it when she said good, and Dad added that all he ever wanted was for me to be okay, even if it was without them, and I told him I was better than I'd ever been. We stood up awkwardly, not sure how to end it, and Mom gave me a quick, careful hug and asked if she could call me next week, and I said she could, and Dad shook my hand firmly and thanked me for meeting them, and I thanked him for going to therapy. I flew back to Portland the next morning and Tyler picked me up at the airport. And when he asked how it went, I told him it was weird but productive, an unclear kind of weird, and that they apologized for real this time and said they were in therapy. And when he asked if I believed them, I said I didn't know yet, but I was willing to find out. We drove back to my place, the home I'd built from nothing after they kicked me out, and that night I stood on my balcony looking at the city lights with the mountain barely visible in the distance when my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah asking about dinner Wednesday, because Maya wanted to try a new ramen place, and I texted back that I was in. Then another message came from Mom asking if I got home safe, and after staring at it for a moment I replied that I did, and we'd talk next week, and she sent back a heart emoji that felt small but meaningful. Tyler joined me on the balcony and handed me a beer and asked if I was okay. And I said, yeah, I thought I was. And when he asked what changed, I told him nothing and everything, that they were trying and maybe it would work and maybe it wouldn't, but either way I was good. When he asked if that was because of them or despite them, I told him despite them, because that was the important part, that I built this life without their approval, and if they wanted to be part of it now, it would be on my terms. And if they messed it up again, I'd still be here and still be fine, because they couldn't take away what they never gave me. Tyler clinked his beer against mine and toasted to building your own life. And that's really the lesson in all of this, that my father suspended me from the family over nothing, so I suspended myself from all of them, moved 3,000 miles away, closed the joint bank account, and built a new life in a new city with people who actually saw me. They thought the suspension was temporary, just a punishment until I apologized, but I made it permanent until they understood, and now 2 years later they're starting to, maybe, and we'll see. But what I learned is that you don't owe anyone access to your life just because you're related. You don't have to accept being invisible. You don't need permission to choose yourself. And sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is leave, not in anger or revenge, but calmly, to build something better, somewhere else with people who truly see you. And if your family eventually figures it out, they can apply to be part of that new life on your terms, not theirs.